Go.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for coming. Our webinar, as you hopefully already know, is called Bridging the Gap, Understanding the Why and How of Inclusion for Autistic Children. And we'll just start with some introductions. Lizzie, do you want to introduce
Yeah,
first?
I'm very happy to introduce myself. My name's Lizzie. I'm an educational psychologist, recently qualified, and I studied at the University of Southampton.
I'm Soraya. I'm also a newly qualified educational psychologist, and I was in the same cohort as Lizzie. So I've had the pleasure of studying with her for the last 3 years.
It
So
was
yeah, it's
very
really nice to
exciting when the moment we realised that our research went together so beautifully. That was very exciting because we didn't know that at the beginning.
Yeah, so we basically just finished our doctorates. And so the plan for today is to essentially share Lizzie's systematic literature review. And we felt that this really paved the way for my empirical paper, hence the title of Bridging the Gap.
Just to talk a bit about language, we don't have lots of time to talk about it, but the best thing kind of when you are talking about any group of people is to ask them how they'd like to be referred to. But I haven't necessarily been able to do that with this piece of research. So the language that we will be using is identity first, so saying autistic person rather than person with autism. It's not There's not a full consensus around this being the preference, but there has been some research to say that that is the preference within the autistic community. So that's kind of the language that we'll be using.
And we also wanted to say that we both conducted our work through a neurodiversity lens because we see autism as a difference rather than a deficit, and that we consider that the environment and society can be primarily the disabling factors rather than the individual themselves, as say the medical model might suggest. But we're of course happy to respond to questions or any debate about this. We'd be really interested in your views. But let's get cracking. And yeah, if you've got anything to share about that at the end, then we're more than happy to discuss with you.
I think
Ready,
somebody just said
Lizzie?
that they can't see us. I don't know if
Oh,
that,
can't see us.
yeah.
I can see the
Is
slides.
that for anybody else or is it? Oh, say something. Okay.
You ready? Can I see slides?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
ready. So my research kind of is something that then leads into Soraya's research. So we're going to start with my systematic literature review, which looked into the experiences of autistic pupils during their time at primary school. There's been a lot of research to show that autistic students are more likely to experience mental health difficulties and have poorer academic outcomes than their peers. And a recent survey found that just a quarter of autistic students feel happy at school, which is just not good enough, is it really? And in terms of the approach that I was going for with my research, it was thinking that maybe mental health difficulties aren't inherent for autistic people. It might be that the environment isn't actually really working for them, or it could be really working for some children, and kind of exploring that a little bit more. There has been some research into the experiences of autistic students, but in my initial scoping search, most of this kind of really focused on the adults that were supporting, so parents or teachers, or the views of children in secondary schools. But as we all know, secondary school and primary school are really, really different. So in secondary school, there's more opportunities for different lessons and to have more social opportunities, but you're not with the same teacher, it might be a bit less predictable. So we can't really draw any conclusions. So that's why I wanted to look at all of the data that had looked at the experiences of autistic pupils during their time in primary school. Oh, looking at my Prisma chart makes me feel a bit weird now that it's over. The aim was to look at all qualitative research that had explored the experiences of autistic students in primary school. So I used the spider tool. If anyone's doing a qualitative synthesis, it's a great way of getting your search terms. And I also looked at other people someone had done the same in secondary school, so I took some of their search terms. I then screened papers based on their inclusion and exclusion criteria. My inclusion and exclusion criteria, I won't go into it, but papers needed to be qualitative. They needed to have at least one student voice, young person voice. They needed to be published in English, which wasn't ideal, but we had to limit it somehow. And then I conducted quality appraisal to make sure that all the papers were kind of up to scratch and of good quality. The interesting thing I found, the interesting thing I found kind of in the Prisma chart was I kept my search terms really quite wide because I didn't want to exclude any papers. So you can see here, you can't see my screen, but in the top left corner, originally there was about 3,000 papers. But once I had got rid of the ones that didn't include young people voice, it was just down to 67. So that showed how much research there kind of was in the area, but not prioritizing young people's voices. And in the end, I had 22 studies. So I analysed my data using thematic synthesis, which is by Thomas and Harden. And if anyone is a trainee EP and they're wanting to do a synthesis of qualitative papers, I'd really, really, really recommend it. It gives some structure, but not too much structure. I just really liked it as a process. I looked through a constructivist lens, which kind of emphasised that me as the researcher will have an impact on my data. I know that somebody else will have different themes, but actually I welcome that. And it was something that was important to the research, was my view, rather than trying to get rid of that. In terms of the process, I did line by line coding. So everything in the 22 papers that was under results, I coded into initial codes. And then I put all of those codes into kind of buckets, which are descriptive themes, where it's kind of just what they would generally go into, not really adding much. And then I generated analytical themes. So these are themes that go beyond the original data to get a new understanding. And that's where my perception and views kind of really impacted it. I had there's quite a lot of themes here, and I won't go into them too much detail because no one will be able to remember them all. But the ones in bold were my analytical themes, and the ones in the lighter colour are my descriptive themes. The thing that's kind of was interesting when I wanted to show this was just how much all of the themes interlinked. So there's kind of lines between all of the themes to show just how complex the experiences of these students are and how much everything related to each other. Soraya?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm here. Sorry, my internet's being a bit funny.
Oh, am I breaking up?
No, it's me. I think it's mine. It says it was a bit unstable.
Oh.
So I've just switched my camera on.
Oh, I see. So we're hoping to publish the paper. So if anyone's interested, they can read it in detail. But what I wanted to do was, rather than talk in lots of detail about each of my themes, actually prioritise the voices of the young people who took part in the different research studies. So what I've done is chosen some quotes, which are the ones that I've chosen. Someone else might choose different quotes to prioritise that felt important. So in my first theme, we all have different experiences of school. What really came through and is to be expected is that autistic students in a range of different schools, in a range of different settings, different ages, they all had completely different experiences. For some, it was great. They loved it. It was fun. It was perfect. For others, it was too long and they didn't like homework. But for others, it really had a negative impact on their mental health. Someone explained how when they were at school, they felt panic mode or that they were scared. There was one quote that really stood out for me. I didn't say it earlier, but I used the experiences of people in school at the time, but also pupils who had left and were looking back at their experiences. And what someone who was looking back on their experience of primary school said, I have scars on my soul from that time. And that really showed, I guess, to me, the long-term impact that that stage of their life had going forward, and that they felt like it was scars on their soul. But yeah, this theme was linked with the slide before and the picture. It was kind of all of the themes were linked, but this one really went through everything. So everything I say kind of going forward should be viewed within the lens of all of these children were having different experiences, and that was impacted kind of by individual differences, but also by their environments. Another really key theme was understand and listen to me. I don't want to look weird. Students really didn't want other people to think that they were weird or that they were different. And when people took the time to understand them, it really had a positive impact on them. One person said that they wished that others understood that their behaviour was not intentional. So when people really took the time to understand, that was so important. Many students felt that the teachers had lots and lots to learn, and that everybody needed to learn more about autism. It was really common for students to hold in or hide their feelings, their need for support, or even their autistic diagnosis. Quite often, there was negative associations with being autistic, and in extreme accounts, it was kind of seen as an illness. If students had been taught a positive narrative about autism, this did then impacted them positively in school. And one person said, you know more stuff about what you like than most people, which was nice. Soraya.
Yes.
Can you...
Has it not moved?
No, it has now.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Just let me know if it's going slow. My internet
No,
thing's
it's fine. The next theme, and one that I've really been reflecting on in my practice as an educational psychologist, and I keep bringing up in every consultation that I'm having, is that was social connection is important. I want to be treated like a human. Friendship appeared to be one of the most important factors contributing to the enjoyment of the young people when they were in school. For some people, they were just really happy with their friends the way that it was. There was also kind of a theme around students being isolated, and it really depended on the student whether this was something that they chose and something that they liked, or actually something that had resulted from the impact of the way that they've been treated. So one person at the top, sometimes I'm by myself, but I like this. Somebody else, they don't really like my ideas, so I like working on my own most of the time. And it seemed that sometimes friendship was important. They wanted to join in, they were rejected, and then actually they chose to be on their own. And it's sometimes in consultations, I've been really working with Senkos and school staff to think, you say that they're enjoying being on their own. Is this something, have we really looked into that in depth, or are there things that happen on the playground where they're feeling isolated? It was also just, there was a lot of speak about bullying and physical abuse, sexual abuse, and feeling like an alien, a freak, and a monster. So just really showing the impact that other people and bullying had on these people, on the participants.
It is, there's just a bit of a delay.
That was a good one, that went quite quickly. The final one, success matters, but environment is key. Motivation to succeed and be challenged in school. For example, this person said, the best part is learning new stuff every time. They were often aware of the gaps in their knowledge, but they didn't always think that what was being taught was very meaningful to them. So that's demonstrated in this quote, I don't learn, they don't teach what I want to know. They really valued having access to a broad and meaningful curriculum, and adaptations that were made for them as an individual, and that really tapped into their interests and what they enjoyed. This is also a quote which I always think about in consultations when thinking about the impact of language. So this person said, the questions to answer is, what did you do this summer? And that feels like a seemingly innocent question. But for this young person, it was really impactful. They were terrified. It's like, well, the summer is a really big thing. I don't know what to say. I don't know what the expectation is. And I also don't know what the question means. So that really highlighted the importance of everybody really thinking about their language when they are talking with all students and the impact of that. I felt like from everything that I had found, I didn't want to write a list of implications, because actually what the young people were saying through their voices, and if we're really listening, is that everybody needs to learn more. And that's learn more about autism in general, but also more about the individual young people that they're working with. So instead of kind of writing specific implications that could then be used as a blanket, I kind of thought about reflective questions that might be more helpful. So in terms of that, is the support tailored to the needs of that individual young person? And how are we finding out? Are we really checking with them that it's working? Is social isolation a choice or due to the school practices or rejection from peers? This is an important one, and one I've been really thinking about in the way that I'm writing my reports and trying to promote in my local authority. Is the support in place trying to make a student less autistic and therefore increasing their masking? So actually, are we trying to fit people in a mold which they don't need to be in? They're brilliant. And how can we increase a sense of belonging, acceptance, and understanding for everybody? Everybody needs to learn more. And I've become more and more aware of how little I know. And Soraya's research was amazing in finding a way where we can learn more. So go ahead.
Thank you, Lizzie. I'm just going to keep my camera off. I'm really sorry. I just would rather the presentation go as smoothly as possible, and I'm worried I will rock the boat. So I'll try and sound as animated as possible as I go through. Okay, so one way that young people can learn more about what it's like to be autistic is through an intervention called positive imagined contact. This is essentially an extension of real life direct contact, and it's based on Allport's intergroup contact theory. And it's defined in the literature as the mental simulation of a social interaction with a member or members of an outgroup. So imagining positive contact can help individuals to, well, it does what it says on the tin, imagine the perspective of others and help them to kind of create and practice scripts. It really lends itself to younger children because it's simple and it's helped by really strong imaginations. And the research tells us that it can also elicit emotions and feelings and thoughts that people might experience during actual direct contact. There's quite a lot of debate, though, in the literature about how best we engage children in imagined contact. So some researchers asked children to, manipulate 2D pictures of typically developing and disabled children in familiar settings like a park, which I've shown in the picture on the left, or writing stories, or simply imagining having a conversation. And there's been a recent increase in studies using these different tools, and looking at the use of imagined contact in changing children's attitudes towards disabled peers. And it has shown success in promoting positive attitudes and behavioural intentions, mainly towards physically disabled peers at the moment. And we do have one study improving attitudes and intentions towards a child with Asperger's syndrome. But as we know, this diagnostic term is outdated, so it is difficult to generalise these findings to those who are diagnosed with or self-identify as autistic. So in the literature as well, there's also debate about whether that 2D level is enough. using the literature, my supervisors and I believe that engaging children in Imagine Contact with using pretend play, with 3D figures, could provide a more tangible hands-on experience. And there's a recent review by Gleason and White in 2023 supporting this argument, because they state that mentally transforming objects and playing different roles in a fictional world can really enable children to consider experiences beyond their own perception. And in a move towards promoting positive representation of disability, you might have seen that some major toy manufacturers have produced 3D disabled toy figures using like assisted devices like wheelchairs, hearing aids, those with Down syndrome, as well as an autistic toy, which I used in my study and I'll show you later on. There's so much to say about disability representation in toys. I don't have the time today, but there is a campaign called Toy Like Me, and you might want to have a look into that further. Okay, so coming back to the research, I was really keen to explore whether imagined contact could be used as a systemic intervention to target barriers in the environment for autistic young people. So, the responses from their peers, because it might be a way that we can move away from some of those social skills interventions that can be designed to change the individual themselves. So I was really excited about this. So my first research question was, does participating in an imagined contact intervention with 3D toy figures improve children's responses towards their autistic peers? And I hypothesized, so I predicted that for those who did imagine contact with an autistic peer, there would be increased positive attitudes, intentions, and self-reported behavior towards autistic children compared to a control group. I also wanted to look at, well, what variables mediate, or in other words, potentially explain that relationship between taking part in this intervention and then those responses towards autistic young people. So I hypothesized that there'd be an increase in cognitive empathy. So that's the ability to adopt the perspective of another. Affective empathy, which is the ability to vicariously experience another person's emotion. Inclusion of the other in the self, which is a bit wordy, but that's essentially how close you feel psychologically to another person. And then a decrease in anxiety would be significant mediators in that relationship. So what did I do? 61 participants aged between 6 to 9 from primary schools in Berkshire took part, and they were randomly assigned to either the experimental group, so imagining contact with an autistic peer, or the control group, so imagining contact with a neurotypical matched peer. And just to say, 4 children in the sample identified as autistic, and 4 children knew at least one person, one autistic person. So in terms of the procedure, all participants, regardless of which condition they were in, were given an age-appropriate definition of autism. I took that from the National Autistic Society. I essentially presented them with this play scene, and I asked them to firstly choose one of 4 3D figures with whom they most identified with. So in the middle, there's an example of one of the figures. And then they were either introduced to an autistic or neurotypical doll, depending on their condition, their group. So here is the autistic doll, Hayden. They're called the Lottie dolls if you want to look into them more. And then I administered the pre-intervention measures, which I'll show you in a minute. But just to say, for the intervention itself, while the dolls are on the scene, basically what I asked them to do was imagine they go to the park together with this tree house, show me how you would have a really good time together. And I gave them 3 minutes because that's a really common length of time in the literature. And then administered the post-intervention measures again. So I'll just quickly go through the measures, but if you have any questions about them afterwards, then I'm happy to share more information. So for both pre and post intervention, I looked at 3 components of attitudes using the Children's Attitudes Towards Autism questionnaire, and that included beliefs, feelings, and behavioural intentions, and all the items were measured on a 5-point Likert scale. I also looked at children's self-reported behaviour because I wasn't observing their behaviour. It was their own reports about their behaviour. So firstly, I asked children to allocate 5 coins between a neurotypical and autistic hypothetical peer and compared that. And then after the intervention, I asked whether they would choose to wear a sticker which said, "I care for and support autistic children." And then finally, just moving on to those mediators, all of them were measured on a 5-point Likert scale with just a few questions each, pre and post, apart from inclusion of the other and the self. As you can hopefully see, there were 4 pairs of overlapping circles, showing that kind of degree of psychological connectedness. And I asked participants to just choose one, how close they felt to an autistic child. And I'll just pause so you can have a quick read. But yeah, I'm really sorry to skip over these, but feel free to ask me more later on. Oh, the exciting bit, I'm going to share the results now and kind of weave part of my discussion that I wrote about in my thesis so I can tie it all together. I just wanted to say that I wasn't sure where everyone was coming from with their statistical knowledge and experience. So I haven't included lots of numbers on this slide. I just wanted to kind of simplify it as much as I can. And also the pattern of results was the same for the 3 components of attitude. So I've just combined them here. So just starting with the beliefs, feelings and intentions, I did 2-way analysis of covariance test, which is essentially looking at group differences between the experimental and the control group. And I did control for age, sex, whether they identified as autistic and the number of known autistic people. So as you can hopefully see, the post-intervention mean score, so if you have a look at the red bars, they were significantly higher, more positive in the experimental group compared to the control group. And as you might be able to see, there were no significant differences in the blue bars, so that was pre-intervention. So that indicated to us that the attitudes between the groups were at similar levels before. And really excitingly, there's also a significant improvement in those scores from pre to post in the experimental group, so in the blue to the red, but that wasn't the case for the control group. And then for the self-reported behaviour, the sticker measure that I did what's called a logistic binomial regression, which is really wordy. I control for the same variables again, as well as that pre-intervention coin measure. The model wasn't significant, and as you can hopefully see, the choice to wear a sticker or not was extremely similar between the 2 groups. And, you know, reflecting back, we wondered actually, is a sticker measure accurately representing behaviour and views towards autistic peers? The children were quite young. I think some of them chose a sticker just because they saw a classmate have one. So I think future research definitely needs to observe children's interactions with their autistic friends and peers in a more authentic context. Oh, I hope you're still with me with the results. We're just going to do the mediation bit now and then on to the implications. So yes, finally I did some mediation analysis. Again, I have really oversimplified the diagram without the numbers just for the purpose of this presentation, but happy to share more detail if anyone wants it. So firstly, I found this serial process, almost like a chain reaction. So essentially what that means is for those who imagine contact with an autistic peer, those positive beliefs towards autistic children emerged first. That suggested that understanding and knowledge of autistic young people played a crucial role in potentially shaping the participants' initial attitudes. And then these positive beliefs in turn led to positive feelings. And, you know, I think people do tend to feel more positively about something when they perhaps understand and appreciate something more. And then finally, these positive feelings then influenced positive intentions towards autistic children, creating that meaningful kind of chain of change. And I just wanted to say that I did reverse the order between the beliefs and feelings, and it wasn't significant. So I suppose it just emphasizes that potential really important role of knowledge and understanding those positive beliefs in shaping children's attitudes. And then next, I looked at those 4 main mediators separately, but again, I've just combined 2 here for ease. So firstly, I found that imagining contact with an autistic peer increases positive intentions towards them through more cognitive empathy, so adopting the perspective of autistic children, and that really wordy one, inclusion of the other in the self, so feeling more psychologically connected. So that was really an exciting finding. But in a really surprising twist, I found that instead of reducing anxiety, as I had initially predicted, the intervention actually led to an increase in anxiety amongst the participants. And, you know, when I looked at the link between anxiety and intentions just in isolation, as I've shown you on the screen, it actually showed that imagining contact with an autistic peer was associated with negative intentions through that increased anxiety. However, when we actually take into account all of the effects, so the overall impact of the intervention with all of the mediators, there were still positive intentions towards autistic children. I hope I haven't lost you by now. I know this is quite complicated, but essentially, what I think the results may be showing us here is that as there was increased cognitive empathy and inclusion of the other in the self, we've hypothesized that, you know, having a better understanding of autistic people's experiences and feeling more psychologically connected to them through the medium of play might have actually acted as buffers against that anxiety. So it almost cancelled out that negative effect and then still led to those positive intentions towards autistic children. I guess think of a situation where you might feel a bit nervous about interacting with someone new, but because you have done something to you know, understand their perspective and feel more connected to them, you still want to be friendly and helpful towards them. But I get this has raised a lot more questions than we originally had. So yeah, we definitely need more research to dig deeper into this. And just to finally say, we didn't find any significant findings for effective empathy. And also, you might be wondering, what about that subgroup of participants who identified as autistic or knew someone autistic? I did run the analysis without them, and the pattern of results were the same. Right, we're on to the last slide now, the implications. So I split my implications into 3 levels, and at that top level, the more systemic level, I suppose a broad implication of these findings is that imagined contact might be a promising way through which we might address the double empathy problem, which suggests that autistic and neurotypical people struggle to understand each other because there's a mismatch in their social expectations and experiences. But, you know, I feel that imagined contact really offers an opportunity to gain insight into the experiences and challenges faced by autistic children, and that what strengths they have in a really relatable, safe and cooperative scenario, which then might facilitate that deeper understanding of how autistic individuals experience the world. And that has been really highlighted as important from Lizzie's research. You know, we need to learn more. At a targeted intervention level, I think a big strength of this study is that it's contributed to the early development of evidence-based components of what imagined contact could look like. I think this is important because my systematic review highlighted a lot of heterogeneity within the previous research. There's a lot of differences in the procedures of the studies, and I think you know, from a practitioner point of view, it makes it really hard for them to know, well, what does imagined contact look like in practice? So my methodology mainly consisted of just replicating and finding further evidence for what's been working well already. So, you know, for example, that included that 3-minute duration of imagined contact, using a tangible method that doesn't necessarily rely on language or written skills, so playing with the 3D figures, and providing information about autism or other disabilities that highlight similarities, strengths, and challenges faced. But I just wanted to say, though, that this research is still in its infancy. There's not yet enough robust evidence, I'd say, to use it on its own as that targeted intervention. So for now, until we do further research, I would say that it's probably best to maybe combine it with something that has a lot more evidence, like a direct contact intervention such as Circle of Friends, which has already been used to promote acceptance and inclusion of autistic children. And finally, at a more universal level, I feel that the application of Imagine Contact could be integrated into educational settings through placing toy figures representing autism and disability. I think this is probably the most important and kind of easy and simple implication to do. But it's important to say that I think placing these figures amongst other play items is not enough. I recommend that practitioners provide guidance and explanations to children when introducing them, and that might include, information about disability or autism, creating play scenarios for them where they can imagine working together on shared objectives, and really stressing that importance of having a positive interaction. And just to say, on that final note, my supervisor has actually been working on some evidence-based resources to use Imagine Contact in schools to facilitate that understanding and discussion around disability. It's really small here, but it's called Toy Box Tales. You might want to have a look into that. It's really exciting and something you can just pick up now and start using tomorrow. Right, I'm going to stop rambling now. That's the end, and thank you for listening. Let us know if you have any questions. Just stop sharing my screen. Oh.
I'm on mute. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Shall we look at the question? Thank you for your talk. Just wondered whether this research was participatory and whether you asked the autistic community about this work, and if so, what feedback did you get? Shall I answer and then you ask, says Soraya?
Yeah.
For mine, unfortunately not. Quite a lot of the research, because I was collating all of the evidence from that, all of the research that had been done, quite a lot of that was participatory. For my other research, I did meet with a panel of autistic young people who were the most helpful people in the world for helping me to guide my questions and my process. But for this one, unfortunately not. But on reflection, I really would have liked to get an understanding kind of and feedback on my themes and whether they were relatable.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing. One of the biggest limitations of my study is that the research wasn't participatory, and I think that's a big limitation across all of the Imagine Contact literature. It's really lacking the voice and placing autistic young people at the heart of, designing the study. And I think what could be really useful is gaining their views about how, for example, autism is defined and the kind of scenarios in which Imagine Contact takes place. Obviously, I used a play scene at the park. It might be that in the classroom, autistic children feel that they have the most difficulty in feeling understood. So I definitely think that's a big next step in that field of study as well. I hope that answers your question. We've got another one about, how did you know that the autistic doll was perceived as autistic and different and not just a doll with headphones on? That's a really good question. So I introduced the autistic doll to all of the participants and made that really explicit. There was headphones, but there was also communication cards, almost like PECs. And we were debating really whether to make autism so salient, make it so obvious with the label. I felt in this study it was really important because we had really young children, a lot of whom had not heard of autism before. So I wanted to use features that were kind of perceptually salient to help them understand. So yeah, but I think it would be interesting to kind of toy with that a bit more in future research, whether we do need that label, whether we do need to make it so obvious. But I think a strength of doing that is that a lot of children, regardless of whether they're working alongside autistic children or not, children need aids like headphones in school, or they might need communication cards. So I think that interacting and playing with those in a positive way might promote their kind of acceptance of them and understanding when they see them in the environment. Although there seems to be benefits of Imagine Contact, do you think there is potential for this research to be taken as othering and exaggerate differences? Yeah, I definitely understand your point, and I think that's why we need to consult with autistic young people to find out their views about this, and find out to what extent do you think it's important to highlight this doll has autism, or use features that are really perceptually salient. Is that what they want? Do they feel like it's used as othering? So I think Imagine Contact has so much potential to kind of adapt the methods that we use. So yeah, perhaps we could find ways where we don't have to exaggerate those differences as much in the future.
I've got some in the chat as well, and I'm very excited about the one from Dora, because I recommend AAA all of the time. Literally all of the time. I think it's an amazing yeah. So sorry, it's just talking about the quotes, but also about the AAA training. It's something that I did for some CPD last year, and I recommend it to all of my Senkos, and I was in a school the other day. So yeah, I will plug you too. Do you have any suggestions for class teachers to support autistic learners to feel comfortable unmasking in the classroom? It's a really interesting one, and one that is quite tricky, and it comes up a lot in my other research. Maybe after another webinar, maybe not. I found that actually a sense of school belonging was something that really, if you've got if you feel a good sense of school belonging, then that reduces camouflaging, and then that impacts mental health and anxiety. So actually really increasing a sense of belonging. There's the Learning About Neurodiversity in Schools programme, which is amazing, and that's almost increasing a sense of belonging and teaching about neurodiversity. Also just having times throughout the day where you can be yourself and just being accepted and understood for who you are. But there's probably loads more that I haven't said. Sorry.
Oh, I know that we're running out of time, but I saw another question in the Q&A box about whether the literature on Imagine Contact has indicated long-term positive impacts. And again, that's a really good question. At the moment, so I didn't do a follow-up in my study, but as you saw, but so far, researchers have kind of followed up after a month, and that has shown continuation of the same findings. It has shown that lasting impact, but is a month enough? I definitely think we need a lot more longitudinal research. Some say that if it's showing up to 2 weeks, and that's almost a sign that it's going to work and it's going to have longevity, but I'm a bit dubious about that. And I definitely think we need some more research to show the longevity, especially with autism. This is the first study to use Imagine Contact in this context, aside from the study with the child with Asperger's syndrome. So yeah, we don't have enough literature yet to be conclusive about that. Oh. I feel bad because we have gone over on time, and I feel like we're keeping lots.
Yeah, I feel like we're keeping people, so maybe we should stop.
Yeah, maybe we could put, I don't know if our email addresses and Twitter usernames are on the advert, but perhaps we could type them in the chat, and then if you've got any more questions, you could send us a message. I'm happy to do that. I'll just quickly type it in now, so hopefully it will work. And then happy to answer any other questions. I get really excited about it, but also know that it's so new, and there's lots of kind of questions about different things, like, you know, exaggerating those differences. So I'm happy to chat about that. I feel like I've got so much adrenaline, I'm not even sure if I've put the right email address in. Oh, and I've just put my Twitter one in as well.
Yeah, I've put my Southampton one. If anyone wants to email me, I'm happy.
Oh,
nice.
Thank you so much for coming.
That's really nice.
Yeah, it was really nice. Thank you. Hope you found it helpful and interesting.